Today I'm here to talk about our conservation innovation grant, graciously provided to us through NRCS. And this is for our project, the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative. And we're going to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is cover crops. And this project, before it was a Subtropical Soil Health Initiative, we were partners with UTRGV in the Subtropical Organic Agriculture Research Partnership, or SOAR. So we've been working with UTRGV for quite a while to get some stuff done down in the valley. All right, so y'all recognize this. It's some soil with cracks in it, and we're growing here in this picture. We're growing some broccoli with clover underneath it, and the hope was that if we put broccoli with the cover crop, that it would help start restoring the soil and all that. In this particular situation, it did not work as well as we would have liked, and that's just because it's too early in the process. So using cover crops by themselves to restore the soil organic matter, which Kara was talking about, it takes a while if you're just using cover crops. And so this is just the very beginning of that process. So after a number of years, of course, the soil would be better off because the organic matter would fill in the cracks and help the soil store more water and just recondition the soil altogether. So this is the soil again without the cover crops, without anything. And you usually see these cracks in soil that's rich in montmorillonite clay or other weak structured clays with high shrink swell potentials. All right, so why do we have so many soil organic matter losses in Texas? Basically because we're high. Cooler areas, they have much more soil organic matter available to them. And that organic matter is a lot more sensitive to loss at higher temperatures. So in a cool area, if the given average temperature rises 1 degree Celsius, you expect to lose about 10% soil organic matter. That's a big deal. But in a warm area, that same rise will result in only about a 3% loss of soil organic matter. And that's because the quality of our soil organic matter is much poorer than the soil organic matter up north. Up there, they have a lot more moisture. The temperatures are cooler, so there's not as much volatilization of the organic matter like we see down here. So soil organic matter is very important in water retention because it's basically a sponge. So soils maintain large reservoirs of water in the organic matter. The hotter it becomes, the more water is lost, but also the more organic matter is lost because the organic matter is oxidized, it's weathered, it's volatilized, it goes away. So the loss of organic matter leads to a loss in water holding capacity because there's less of the sponge there to hold the water in place. The less water in the soil, the hotter the ambient temperatures become, because of course water holds a lot of heat. So if water absorbs heat, then it makes it cooler. So this causes a self-replicating cycle of heating. The hotter it gets, the less water is held in the soil. The less water is held in the soil, the less organic matter is available to hold the water. So it just keeps spiraling upward and upward and upward, and it doesn't get better. In hot and humid areas, you need twice the inputs of organic matter to maintain fertility. And this is not just once a year. This is every growing cycle. And that's kind of difficult and expensive for most people. So if you use a no-till system, you lose about half the amount of conventional tillage. But using no-till, if everything else remains equal, it should equalize. But it really doesn't because it's hard to incorporate, the organic matter to get it to where it is. You can leave it on top as a mulch and that'll help. But if you're using it as a mulch and you're trying to grow crops at the same time, it's it's kind of difficult, especially in annual vegetable production. Now, in a perennial production system, like if you were going an orchard, a vineyard, a grove of some sort, then you start to see those benefits a little bit better. So another good thing about soil organic matter is that it disperses negative effects. So like if you look at these organic molecules, they're huge, they're gigantic, long chain molecules. And since they're such long chain molecules, they act like a chemical amoeba in the soil, basically. They're big, long chains of molecules. They hold a bunch of stuff, and they gather harmful things like iron and manganese or aluminum, and they basically disarm those toxic levels. So they disperse the toxicity in the humus and all that. All right, so how do you build your soil organic matter? People get mad at me because I'm not a composter. I don't believe in composting because in hot areas, you increase volatilization of nitrates and carbon, and those are the things that you need in the soil, right? So if you're in a really hot area and you've got this exothermic reaction, this heat releasing reaction of composting, then all the stuff you really want in the soil is being lost to the atmosphere because of the heat. So I'm not really a fan of composting. Now manure is a good alternative for if you can use it, but it's really bulky and it's messy to move, and there's regulations if you're organically certified and all that. So what's my general go-to is cover crops. I love cover crops. I've been growing cover crops for a long time now. And what I found is that, since, cover crops, they're basically growing organic matter in place. There's no withdrawal period. So there's a withdrawal period if you use manure, because you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can start using that field for vegetable production again. Well, at least if you're organically certified. If you use nitrogen, if you use legumes, they add nitrogen. They just naturally remove atmospheric nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it into the topsoil and all that. They also, if they're deep-rooted, taproot type cover crops, they remove minerals from the subsoil and bring it back up to the topsoil, or bring it back into their canopy, and their canopy drops their leaves onto the soil surface, which allows it to get back into the topsoil. The roots also increase soil porosity. A good example of this is Medicago. The one that y'all have down there is that burr medic, the Medicago polymorpha. It has these really deep roots, but they're very fibrous. And so once those deep fibrous roots penetrate the subsoil, they leave pore space when they die. And so that pore space gets inhabited by different soil microbes. Those microbes help aggregate the soil and all that. And then other larger rooted plants, they can push that pore space open bigger over time. So that helps increase soil porosity and move soil microbes to where they need to be deeper in the soil profile. So you can mow and incorporate cover crops, or you can mow and leave them as mulch, or you can have no-till systems. It just depends on what application you're using them for. If you're using them with annual vegetables, mowing and incorporating is better versus mowing and mulching. Because if you mow and mulch in annual vegetables, then it can leave some residue in the way and all that. So mow and mulch and mow and no-till are better for perennial production. All right, so here's an image from our project, and this is our block 15, and this is over at Hilltop Gardens. Now, you can see there's a bit of spotty coverage, spotty germination, all that sort of thing. And that's because it was a very dry year. And plants need water. They just need water. And if you're in a droughty soil, you can expect some spotty germination, because not every seed is going to get the amount of water it needs to germinate and thrive, or the small plants aren't going to get enough water to grow and thrive. So ideally, when you're growing cover crops, you want them to be able to cover up everything. You want every inch of soil covered by something green to prevent solar radiation from hitting the soil surface. So this is just some soil monitoring, soil moisture monitoring from that same block 15. And we see some results, and unfortunately, there was more moisture in the control than the cover crops. And this is one of those continual questions that many producers have, that if they grow cover crops, it's going to steal all their moisture. And in this particular case, we can see that at this depth where they measured moisture, this appears to be the case. So we're looking at soil organic matter in block 15. Over the course of several years, we've had some different cover crop combinations or single species in the different plots. And we see after the course of the project is run, we do see that there's just a little bit more total organic matter over the course of the project, just a little bit. And this is kind of confounded by the fact that it's so hot and dry there. And so over the course of like if we extended this out for like 20 years, we would probably see much bigger differences. But over the span of just a short time, and the crops we looked at, we didn't see as much as a difference as we would have liked. But we're learning, and you've got to realize that like in cover crop 4 here, we had about a 0.5% rise. And if we're starting off with low amounts anyway, half a percent is pretty good, especially when you consider how much water that 0.5% of organic matter actually holds. All right, so how do you choose cover crops? There's lots of things that you should look at, especially like your soil considerations, like your soil pH. What's the texture? Kara mentioned, that with the soil triangle, that things can be more clay, more sandy, more silty, or more loamy. What cover crops flourish in your particular soil texture and soil pH? Also important is it droughty? Does your soil hold water? Do you get enough rain? Those sorts of things. Is there flooding, ponding? Is there any amount of water that just stands in your field for weeks and weeks at a time? Or, does it drain pretty well? And then lastly, diseases. So are there things like fusarium or other things that get into your soil that stay there, and they're hard to get rid of? So look at if those cover crops that you're looking at are susceptible to whatever disease, like if you've got some fungal sclerotia left in your soil that's going to feed on your cover crop. You don't want it to be able to feed on your cover crop. You want something that those long-term fungal diseases can't thrive on. Also very important, and I tell producers this all the time, you have to understand your growing seasons and cycles. Now, everyone else in the country, they've got like fall and spring and summer and winter and seasons like that. And in our cases, we have hot and dry, or we have wet and cold. And you just have to understand how to work with your cover crops in those seasons. You've got long and hot, you're going to grow a specific cover crop. If you've got a short cool season, you're going to grow some other cover crops. So just understand what applications you're using the cover crops for. And then another important thing is your next crop. Is there an allelopathy aspect to your cover crop? Is it going to hinder the next crop, or is it going to enhance the next crop? Usually with the legumes, they enhance the following crop because they've got nitrogen fixing bacteria that helps them put some nitrates in the soil. But some of them are allelopathic, and allelopaths are things that suppress other crops. So just understand those things when you're choosing your cover crops. And then equipment requirements. If you're a vegetable producer and you're trying to grow cover crops, do you have the equipment to maintain them? Do you have stuff that you would most likely need in a haying operation? A lot of that equipment can become expensive. So your management practices, your methods of growing and all that become very important when you're choosing a cover crop. Because if you don't have the equipment, you're going to use something like buckwheat, which completes its life cycle in like 40 days, 45 days, and then it gets out of the way, versus using something like sun hemp or sorghum Sudan grass or pigeon peas, things that require some larger equipment to get them mowed out and moved out of the way. And then next is weed control. Very important aspect of cover crops. Before I was at NCAT, I was with Prairie View, and one of the things that I used cover crops was weed control in my organic research plots. And the system I came up with up there, and I say up there, but because y'all are in the valley, I'm up here in Prairie View still. But the system that I came up with was to use 2 cover crops, one after another, and then grow the cash crop or whatever. So if I was growing strawberries, plant strawberries in October. The summer before then, I would have had like cowpeas or the iron and clay pea cowpeas, or something of that nature that could hold up to the summer. And then before the iron and clay peas, I would have had a fall cover crop like crimson clover or Austrian winter peas. So running 2 cover crops back to back and then planting a cash crop allowed me to get rid of most of the weeds I had, because the weeds never had a chance to complete their life cycle, and they also never had a chance to flourish in the seasons. Remember the seasons and cycles. They never had a chance to flourish in the seasons that they would have normally been actively growing, because there was a cover crop canopy in the way. So weed control, very important aspect of choosing your cover crop. All right, so I'm going to talk about some specific cover crops. These are just handy facts, and they're by no means comprehensive. For more information, you can refer to our related publication at ATRA, which is the cover crop options for hot and humid areas. One thing that I did want to touch on before I get into the cover crops is inoculation. Most of the legumes you're dealing with, they're going to need their rhizobium partner. And rhizobium is a soil bacteria that, by itself, it's just kind of a saprophyte. It just, feeds on stuff in the soil. So it needs organic matter to persist in the soil. But once it pairs up with its desired legume, it creates a little thing called a nodule. That little nodule helps produce nitrates for the plant and the surrounding areas. So some of the nitrogen production of the rhizobium leaches out in the soil for other plants to take advantage of. Some rhizobium persists in the soil better than others and don't need to be applied to seed every year. That's a very important aspect when you get into buying seed, because some of the seed are inoculated. I just put some red clover, not my favorite crimson clover because I didn't have any, but I just put some red clover out on my property for my cattle and stuff, and it was inoculated seed, and it was like pink. They want you to know for sure that it was actually inoculated, and that inoculum is going to stay on that seed. If you already have a species that is related or uses the same rhizobium, and a good example is vetch. If you've got vetch growing, then and you pull up a vetch plant and you look at its root, and that root has nodules on it, and you break those nodules open and they're pink on the inside or salmon color on the inside, you know that the rhizobium is present and it's persistent in your soil, and you don't need to really apply more inoculum to your seed if you're growing things like peas, which use the same rhizobium as the vetch. Same thing with medicago. Any of the medics and clovers, they use the same inoculant. And then cowpeas and mesquite and a bunch of other ones use the same inoculant or same rhizobium. So those you wouldn't need to apply if they're already present. But if you're growing something new, if your field doesn't have any vetch and you haven't seen anything related to the pea family, pea genus out there, then yes, you're going to need to use a rhizobium. And then even if you use rhizobium on those things, and because they haven't grown there, it might be an ephemeral type rhizobium. It may last that season that you inoculated, but for whatever reason, the soil conditions are not right for it to persist. So you're going to have to keep applying it and applying it. And then there's even a question, are these store-bought inoculates effective? Because they've been sitting around somewhere, maybe in a refrigerator for a long while. Have they expired? Is your method of getting them to stick to the seed efficient? Lots and lots of information about that. And one of our project members, Stephanie Casper, wrote her thesis about it. So if you want to know more, track her down and get her thesis from her and figure out what's going on with these rhizobium inoculants. All right, so one of the cover crops we used through the course of the project was cassia or chemacrista, and chemacrista is a native. I like using it because it grows quickly once it does germinate, and it doesn't need a lot of attention or love or anything like that. And if you know me, I don't baby plants. I don't baby my crops. I put them out there so they can face the most harsh environment they can face. If they survive, yay. If they don't, I'm going to grow something else. Chemacrista can be toxic to cattle in later stages of development. So it's not something you want your cattle to feed on once it starts flowering and fruiting and all that. It uses the native cowpea and peanut inoculant. And the common name is partridge pea. So it attracts doves and other birds and stuff. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for you, I don't know, but it does it. This is what it looks like. This stuff grows all over the place. In fact, over there by my Tractor Supply, whole field, and it's like $25 a pound. So I might go over there and harvest some seeds this fall. I mentioned two different species, rotundifolia and fasciculata. And cassia chemacrista, whoever is doing the nomenclature or taxonomy by whatever school of thought, they use those almost interchangeably. But anyway, you'll find it either way. But rotundifolia is more prostrate. It stays close to the ground, and fasciculata is upright. It stands up straight. So this one is fasciculata. Then we've got Vignounga Colada or cowpeas. My favorite cowpeas are the iron and clay peas. Now, I say that with some caveats because the iron and clay peas that I was planting 10 years ago, 15 years ago is it's different than what they're calling iron and clay peas now. So the ones now, some breeder somewhere messed them up and they don't vine out as much as they should. And I talked to a breeder about this a while back, and he said, yes, there was a shift some time ago. So if you can find a more wild type of Vignounga Colada, it might be better off for you than the native variety iron and clay, because that vining is not as proficient as it used to be. But in any case, they can fix between 150 and 200 pounds of nitrogen in the soil for the next crop. They produce about 1 to 3 tons of dry matter per acre per year. And so usually you'd see a bit heavier dry matter on some of the leguminous cover crops. Vigno, it breaks down to be very, very light and wispy. It doesn't have a lot of pith to it. It doesn't have a lot of substantive growth or persistent organic matter. It tolerates very dry conditions, drought. It can take it once it gets established. Once it gets 10, 20, between 20 and 30 inches long, it should be very well tolerant of drought because it will have got enough root mass to do so. It's very good as a weed suppressor, and that's going to count on that vining trait and the amount of seed you're planting per acre. You want to get enough population density to suppress the weeds. It's used as a green manure crop, so people grow it, let it flourish, and then they turn it under the soil. And then it's a pretty good fodder crop. It creates 20 tons of fresh matter per acre, and fodder is for feeding your animals and stuff, letting them graze on it. That's what it looks like in the field. You can see there's no weeds in there. It's nice and dense. It's covering up the field pretty well. Next, and so like part of our CIG grant, well, my part of the CIG grant was to look at things that people don't ordinarily grow, some weird stuff, some things that present an opportunity to a producer to occupy like a niche market. And one of those is Clitoria terniata, or the butterfly pea. This is native to sub-Saharan Africa, and it uses the same inoculant as cowpeas. It's a very beautiful ornamental plant, and like in countries like India, it's used as a valued medicinal crop for its flowers and the tea made from them. It yields about 2 tons per acre dry matter, more fertilized and irrigated, and 15 pounds per acre is optimal seeding rate. However, if you're going to use this, it's mostly sold on an ornamental scale. So you're going to have to buy your seed and then multiply it out. But it makes plenty of seed. So this is doable. You have to buy your own seed and then multiply it out, and then you'll be able to cover up that acre. So it'll take a while, but the good thing is that they are perennial. So as long as you keep it alive, it'll come back next year. This is what it looks like. And you can see where it gets its name from in the shape of the flowers. The beautiful color of the flowers is a potent antioxidant, very, very good and healthy for you. All right, so next is Crotalaria gentiana, also known as sun hemp. Some people get sun hemp and hemp confused, even PhDs, so watch out for that. These are very different species, very different plant families and all that sort of stuff. They fix about 300 pounds of nitrates per acre. They produce about 5 tons of dry matter. Now, these are a little bit more robust and all that in comparison with cowpea. So this and cowpea grown together makes an excellent combination. Now, Sun hemp also attracts beneficial insects, especially trichogramma. And trichogramma is an egg parasite of moths. So when moths lay their eggs, trichogramma wasp comes along and lays its egg inside that egg and kills a little developing pest in the field. If you use intercropping, it can reduce disease prevalence on squash. And that's because Crotalaria gentiana or sun hemp is a very erect, tall, because it can get up to like 6 feet, 7 feet, whatever. It's very tall. And when you have these erect legumes growing amongst your vegetable crops, when the wind comes through and tries to blow the inoculum or the pathogen from one plant to another, it gets locked up in the sun hemp plant or pigeon pea plant or whatever, and it doesn't live on those plants. So it blocks that inoculum from being spread around the field. And it also uses the same rhizobium as the cowpeas. This is what it looks like. There's several different varieties that we've used. Some of them can actually set seed below Corpus Christi, some of them can't. And, some of them can above Corpus Christi, and some of them can't set seed. I messed myself up. Anyway, just be aware that there's some day length dependence on the plants, and so if you plant them in the wrong place, you won't get seed, and some people don't want seed. All right, next is Mucuna pruriens, or the velvet beans. These were itching powder. I don't know if y'all remember that, if y'all are old enough to remember itching powder, but that's where it came from, velvet beans. There's a cultivar, Mucuna pruriens utilis, that is not so pruritus. So utilis doesn't make you itchy. It was once widely used in the southern United States, but it was supplanted by soybeans because soybeans didn't have that itchy trait, and they were probably a cheaper seed. A related species, Mucuna bracteata, is becoming more popular in tropical regions. It's used as a cover crop in rubber plantations in India. So it could also be very useful in papaya groves, or maybe even citrus, depending on your production practices and what you really want to get done. This is what it looks like. It's got some very beautiful, unique flowers. The seeds of this can be many different colors, and they're rather largish seed. So they're a little expensive to start getting established. But once you get it and it grows for you, you can collect seed off of it. All right, next is a sorghum Sudan grass hybrid. This is one of the things that was very successful for the project. Personally, I try not to use grass, but this one did very well, and it was a very effective cover crop. A sorghum Sudan grass, or like one variety we have here, is a hay grazer. It's valued for its rapid establishment. It's a nitrogen and nutrient scavenger, so it's like a vacuum cleaner. You plant it, it's going to suck up everything in the soil, and it's going to get really, really tall. So it produces 4 to 8 tons of dry matter per acre. So they use this in hay production. You can produce 12 to 15 tons of silage per acre. One of the drawbacks of using the sorghum species is that they can form prussic acid, which is a cyanogenic glycoside when they're stressed. And this is going on when you look out in the field and it's red. So if it's too cold, it'll turn red. If it's too hot, if it's like really, really droughty, they can turn red, and that's the cyanogenic glycosides. This is what the sorghum Sudan grass looks like, and this is not too long after establishment. So this grows really, really fast. And then next is my absolute favorite cover crop right now, which is Kajanas Kajan, or the pigeon pea. And we had a pigeon pea field day, and if y'all were there, y'all saw that the producers really love this stuff because the first thing they asked, because everything else was dead and Pigeon Pea was thriving and green and happy, and it was over 6 feet tall. And when you walked out in the field, and you got under the canopy of it, the temperature dropped about 10 to 15 degrees under there. It's a great cover crop. It does have a few drawbacks, but it just goes back to your production system and what you really want to get out of your cover crops. It's a very effective nitrogen fixer, about 250 pounds per acre, forms about 2.5 tons of dry matter per acre, or 35 tons fresh weight per acre. It exudes pycitic acid, which releases an insoluble phosphate from the soil. So this can help release those phosphates from your soil that get locked up. And it really doesn't care about drought much. This is what it looked like. And if you notice on this pod right here, there's a little hole in it. So it does have a few problems with, what is it? I forget the name of that pest, but it's a little seed borer. And it's the same seed borer that affects the mesquite pods and all that. But once we figure out how to get that under control and make some selections out of it, this will do a lot better for us. They've been around or domesticated for 3,000 years, and they account for 5% of the total world legume production. So there's some other stuff. I'll just rush through that. But this is our field. Now you notice on the end of the rows here, there's some pigweed. But deep in here, if you look out of this field, there's not a lot of stuff. Normally, this field would have been inundated in sunflowers and pigweed and what's that stuff? The parthenium and all those other summer weeds down there. But pigeon pea, once it got established, now I have to say that I did have to weed it for a little while to get it to this point. But once that canopy closed, no weeds really persisted under that canopy. All right, I'm gonna stop, and we can ask questions or whatever now.
Justin, there are a whole slew of questions, and some of them are hyper specific. So let's at least get to one here. First, I'd like to say Manish, Zulian, Timothy, Lois, hey Lois, and Adegboyega as well have all asked really good questions. But it seems like one consistent one here is, with the trials and with the cover cropping you guys are doing, is it one species that you guys are planting, or are you incorporating different cover crops into each planting? Is it monoculture or is it diversified?
So the ones that I was doing on my side of it, I use monoculture, but the UTRGV side, they were using mixes. And one of the slides I showed, it detailed those mixes in block 15. And so, but yeah, they mix them. I don't like mixing them because I'm usually using cover crops in conjunction with vegetable production. So I want something that's going to all mature at the same time, be at the same level of maturity, the same physiological size and all that at the same time, so that I can deal with it all at once, rather than this one has grown and this one hasn't grown, and this one is it didn't do what it needed to do yet because the others are suppressing it, and the timing is all off. Like, I don't want to deal with all that. I want to keep it simple, use one cover crop and move that cover crop off to the next cover crop or to cash crop. So you can mix them. And I'm sure if you get with Dr. Rosellis, he can give you a list of the mixes and stuff they use and how those turned out.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And as a reminder, so Alex is going to be talking about the project, about the CIT project, which is NRCS funded tomorrow morning. So everyone should pay attention to that. And we're also going to be doing a recruiting pitch for those growers, for producers who are joining us, who would like to become part of the trial, who want to actually participate in some of this cover cropping. So Justin, I want to thank you so much.